tries to figure out both the trial and the verdict, and we're learning much more about what may have been in the jurors' minds as they deliberated. Andrew?
Well, you said the information's trickling out, Rich. Thus far, we've heard from one juror, known as Juror B37. She says she was certain it was Zimmerman's voice she heard on that 911 call and believes that other jurors felt the same.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
George Zimmerman is now a free man, but we're learning that the initial vote by the jury was split. 3 jurors said he was not guilty at all. 3 others voted guilty. 2 thought he was guilty of manslaughter. Another thought he was guilty of second-degree murder in the shooting death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Appearing in shadow, Juror B37 told CNN's Anderson Cooper that ultimately the jury decided Zimmerman could claim self-defense under Florida law, but that it was a difficult decision.
I think both were responsible for the situation they had gotten themselves into. I think both of them could have walked away. It just didn't happen.
But her interview, at one point she referred to Zimmerman as George and Trayvon as that boy, has ignited even more outrage, prompting comments like this on Twitter. Quote, "I don't even have words to adequately describe how disgusted I am with Juror B37. The not guilty verdict has ignited an emotional response across the nation. In LA, violence and vandalism resulting in 13 arrests. Other violent protests took place in Oakland, but around the country, most were peaceful. The outrage, though, has caused Zimmerman's parents to fear for their son's life. They spoke exclusively to ABC's Barbara Walters.
There will be people looking for him for a long, long time.
The juror who is speaking out had planned to write a book, but she has now decided against it. For their part, Trayvon Martin's parents are still keeping silent, only releasing a statement through their attorney saying, quote, "In order for Trayvon to rest in peace, we must be peaceful." Rich?
You know, I don't know how, Dom, but somehow from even Saturday when the verdict came down to now, in part because of what that juror said in that interview, and you hear the whole thing, those people, that boy, talking about Zimmerman as George, you just, I don't know, you just get angrier about how we got here, and you just, the worst fears were confirmed. Now, I don't know about the other 5 jurors, maybe we'll never hear from them, but if they're anything like that one, they went into those deliberations, we understood they were conflicted when they went into the deliberations, certainly at least in the manslaughter charge, and you say, my gosh, we can do better than this.
Well, Richard, the bottom line, the feds are going to have to take this case. It's a political landmine for President Obama.
I don't think so
really?
Today, because I heard, I don't know about you, Ryan, I heard Eric Holder say that stand your ground, we can do better than this. And he talked about how he's going to have a conversation with his 15-year-old son, just like his father had with him. And my takeaway from that, Ryan, is they're trying to change statute in Florida. They're not trying to look at this in terms of the feds taking on this case because the high standard Richard, from a civil rights.
But every black man has that conversation with their son. That's nothing new.
From at least what I took away from them, I got the idea that the feds weren't going to take this. They were going to try and work through Florida.
I think they probably won't take this. I think that their best hope, justice is through the civil courts. Through so I hope that happens. But I don't think the federal courts.
Listen, the FBI, as a civil rights attorney, FBI criminal division typically gets involved when there is an issue of hate crimes. When there usually, and it has to be federal statutes behind this or the Constitution. So hate crimes, violations of reproductive rights, housing, voting rights, and a couple other things, but certainly none that would fit under the criteria that took place in Florida between George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin. So it'll be hard for them to find jurisdiction in this case.
But here's what I was thinking. I think we all put this in our own human terms, and you guys bring different experiences than certainly I do. But I said, I got a son. If my kid came home to my house and he had Skittles and an iced tea, I don't care if he's wearing a hoodie or not. If a guy was told, black guy was told, sit in your car and don't get out, and he went out and he shot my kid, here's what would have happened, even if in Florida. I don't think, first of all, my kid would have been shot that night. Secondly, I don't think the guy who shot him would have been released from prison. Third thing is, I don't think they would have unclaimed my child or even not gone through the basic decency of figuring out who the John Doe was till the next day. And third thing is, the guy who shot him, they wouldn't have waited 6 weeks to put together a prosecution for him, let alone that guy wouldn't be walking around here today, free and getting his gun back. I don't think anything I said is really controvertible. So how can we just sit here, and this isn't some bleeding heart saying this, saying, wait a minute, this makes sense. He didn't do anything wrong. You're allowed to be black and go to the convenience store and go home at night. And somehow, some way, maybe it took me 2 days longer than a lot of folks, but at the end, the court said, no, it's okay. The guy who wasn't a cop, who had a pee for a brain and couldn't make it as a cop, and was told to sit in his car, got out, killed a kid, and now is worried that people are going to take justice into their own hands. It's just so twisted. Anything I say wrong?
Look, at the end of the day, Zimmerman brought a gun to a fist fight, essentially. And that just doesn't sit well. It doesn't sit well with me and a lot of other people I talk to. And that's the tragic part. The unfortunate thing of this is that the jury can only consider the information in which they have. And when you look at, I've been following the trial, when you look at the information, it just did not rise to depraved heart, disregard, murdering Trayvon in cold blood. The evidence
How much
didn't
do you
present
put that on the prosecution?
A lot. Squarely on the prosecution that they overcharge Zimmerman in this case.
The jury could have said, gone with manslaughter. I think this was a clear case of manslaughter. I think that they had that within Florida law.
I think the prosecution should have just went with manslaughter, but you brought out the self-defense, you brought out the reasonable doubt.
How about the race, though?
That was it. Look, the prosecution said, it's very interesting. So the prosecution says, well, this is not about race. And then when the prosecutor says, but close your eyes and pretend Trayvon was white. But it's not about race. It is actually about race. And it is that looming feeling of injustice that African Americans face when they go into the courtroom. And the statistics to prove it. The disproportionate amount of African Americans in jail to their population. Now, whether or not folks are guilty or not, we don't know, but it's just that feeling. And you get that from the civil rights era, from the 1960s, where you had, these discussions about in the Johnson administration, can an African American get a fair trial in the jury? And back in the 1960s,
How
and
about
you still
we talk
feel
about
that
every week?
Well,
it's
that's
okay
what
to stop
this
a black guy in the city because they're more than likely to do something than a white guy, and you got the mayor saying that you need to even go further.
Welcome to our world. I mean, there's no other way to put it. When we walk into a store, a department store, a lawyer, a journalist, we are followed by, we can have a suit on, a tie on, we are followed by undercover security. Now, that's not to say that blacks are not committing crime. Some are, but not all. Right. And the flim-flam that they pulled on us, and that's, notice the word, flim-flam. Explain this to me. How do you tell us that there's an African American on the jury? You tell us that throughout the duration of the trial, and then you go, oops, we think that she's Latino. And we still don't know any of their names.
At the end of the
How
day,
is that?
At the end of the day, we have to have several things. We have to have a serious conversation about race. The race conversation didn't end because we have an African American president. We have to also, as African Americans, take things into our own house. We need to have discussions with our children. We need the NAACP to get on board and talk about black crime, about health care, how diabetes and heart disease is killing the African American, education, things like that. We need to have those discussions. So we need to get our own house in order, and we need to have discussions about race with our counterparts. We need to have those serious discussions.
I think we've also got a couple of bad laws, the stand your ground law in Florida, the stop and frisk policy in New York. Not only bad laws that are being unevenly applied. You've got the case of the woman who got 20 years in prison in Florida, black woman for firing a warning shot into the air. You've got something, 90% of all the stop and frisk targets in New York City being black or Hispanic. And so you've got bad laws.
Didn't you get the impression, Andrew, when you heard that juror today talk, that was a cop-out? What they really, again, I'm divining stuff. I don't know this woman. But when I heard her talk, and she talks about that boy, and then she talks about Zimmerman as George, and she said that he had a good heart, Zimmerman, that this was, at the end of the day, they were looking for a reason to let the guy go.
Richard, it was a jury by his peers, by Zimmerman's peers.
Not by Trayvon's peers.
No, it was a jury. I mean what I said. It was a jury by his peers. They walked in on day one looking for every reason to be sympathetic to George Zimmerman. You had prosecutors that had blindfolders on that really didn't want to prosecute the case, but politically they had to, but they didn't put forth their best effort. I really believe a first-year law student could have did a better job than those seasoned prosecutors did.
I agree to an extent with that. That I don't think they did the best job they can, and I really think they botched this and
But
really
again,
set it up for failure.
But again, at least in part hindered by this law that stopped the investigation
No
and
doubt,
delayed that.
No doubt. It's just, again, if you just reverse the colors make it real easy. Some militant guy who couldn't get his life going in any way, shape, or form, with a track record for calling the cops. Imagine, he's now 40-something years old, 300 pounds, sitting in his car, and the guy says, sit there, don't get out. And you get a white kid going home, just going home with Skittles and iced tea. We all know it would be different. And somehow, some way, we sit here saying, yeah, stand your ground, it's a bad law.
It might have been like Sean Bell. There wouldn't even been a trial, right? I mean, if George Zimmerman was black and those cops had shown up, there's a chance that George Zimmerman wouldn't have walked away that night. So,
but there's always, well, we have to always believe in our jury system. If we look back at Larry Davis back, I think it was in the 80s, when he shot several police officers, claiming self-defense, that they were, trying to kill him. He got off. What he did get convicted of was weapons violations, which he spent 25 years in jail and was killed in jail for weapons violations. But he got off, and that's a jury in the 1980s in New York City. But
it's a Bronx jury. Bronx juries are different.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But we have to believe in our system, and
believe
most of the time we get it right.
I believe in our system, but I just think tonight, somehow, when you hear the voices behind the verdict, or at least the voice, it made all the worst kind of fears, at least to put some color around it. And the idea that this wasn't about race, and anybody who's saying that is just living in a world that Justice Roberts believes that we don't have a race problem anymore.
But has a jury been done before where we don't know the names? Has that been done before?
Yeah.
I really think that's a bad rule.
I
really
get
believe
that.
tell you
I'm
that
okay
all
with
the women's names were Paula Dean. There were 6 Paula Deans.
All right. Well, let's keep this conversation going online and go to Facebook and Twitter to sound off. Again, the question we asked you at home yesterday, got some great phone calls on it, was justice served, and time permitting, we'll read some of those responses later in the program. Up next, do not call him the love gov. It turns out it hurts his feelings. Dominic sat down one-on-one with Elliot Spitzer, who's looking to rejoin elected office, and we're going to have more on that after this.